thank you all so much for being here. Briefly, my name is Seamus Strapp, for those who might not know me or know me that well. My lovely wife is over here holding our newish born child, Sparrow. And we have Shepherd and Salem. They're the toe-headed kids that run around. So you probably all know that, but just in case you need a reference point. This is a new Sunday school class that is launching today. It's a 12-week class, and we'll kind of talk through that. I will be recording these 12 classes. So I have a YouTube channel. Don't look it up. It's embarrassing. So, but if you're seeing the camera in the back, that's what that is. So if you don't want to be on camera, or if you don't want to talk because you're, in witness protection, which is your business, be mindful of that. Don't share your name and your address as you answer a question. That's the background. So as we launch into this, let me kind of talk to you about what I mean with the phrase, the history behind the New Testament. Why did I choose this topic? Well, first off, I absolutely love history. I love reading biographies. I love watching documentaries. I love not listening to loud children. So I love history. History is absolutely fascinating to me. I think that in a lot of ways, I think Lord Byron gave the famous quote that fact is stranger than fiction. There's oftentimes when you hear a story and you go, how could that possibly be true? History has a way of making stories that are better than anything Hollywood can create. And that's why often Hollywood has to take from what's going on in real life. So I really love history. I really love the Bible. And my hope is through this class, we can kind of fuse these two spheres of knowledge together. And I hope that could be beneficial to all of us. So we're going to kind of meld the two worlds of history and Bible together. And why should we do that is because the Bible is history. These are things that actually happened in history, and we can be confident of that. Now, if you are of the Reformed ilk and you're a Van Tillian, if you are a presuppositionalist, you might be hearing me and saying, well, Seamus, we don't need to prove that the Bible is true by looking at history. The Bible is just true. That's not what we're going to argue about in this class. I'm not going to say that the Bible is true because of these historical facts. I'm just going to tell you that these historical facts happened, and the Bible is there to say, yes, we lived amongst these things. These things happened. That's what makes the Bible unique. We'll talk about this as we get to the ministry of Jesus, but what makes Jesus' resurrection myth, and we'll use that myth term as in C.S. Lewis, thank you, Steve Boggs. We'll use the term myth in the fact that it is the most truest thing that could ever be that actually came to life. And so the resurrection stories were famous all the time. You might have heard people who try to debunk Christianity. They talk about how all the pagan gods resurrected. Yes, that's true, but there were never followers who were alive that said, and we saw it. Nobody saw Dionysus raised from the dead, and then one of his buddies was like, I was there and witnessed it. The unique thing about the Bible and about Christianity is that it happened in history, and the people who witnessed it were saying, yes, I was there. I was there. I saw this thing. That's what makes Christianity utterly unique amongst kind of the Near Eastern religions and the religions, all religions overall. So my hope is that we could see that there's a mixture of Bible and history, that the Bible is a bit of a history book. It's not only a history book. There's theology to it. I don't want to diminish that. So that's why we're doing this class, as we will see. I wanted to ruin all those animations. I thought I'd turn those off because they make me seasick looking at them. But let's talk about what we hope to get out of this class. After 12 weeks, what do I want you as a student, as my disciples, I'm going to call you my disciples, what do I want you all to get out of this class? Well, first off, I want you to understand the historical, cultural backdrop of the Bible. As you're reading parts of Scripture, you're going to come across names, you're going to come across cities, locations, that you're going to go, I don't know what those things are. And hopefully we're going to be able to shape your mental map to be able to understand who these people and what these things are. But then also there's cultural realities that we are absolutely blind to. That when Paul in his letters, when he's speaking to certain ideas, he's saying to the reader, you kind of know what I'm talking about, and I don't need to name certain things. It's interesting that Paul never uses the name of any Greek god in any of his letters. But Luke, who's a pagan, he does. He talks about Zeus and Hermes. But when we're reading some parts of Scripture, you're gonna, if you're understanding some of the context of what these gods were about and what they were the gods of, Paul is alluding to them. But as a good Jew, he doesn't want to utter, some people believe he didn't want to utter the name of any false gods. So I want you to understand those historical and cultural backdrops of the Bible. I want you to become a more attentive Bible reader. I want you to understand these things so that when you're reading Scripture, there's a light bulb over your head. There's an aha, eureka, I understand what this means. And then as I understand what it means, it shapes me better. It forms me into the glory of Christ more and more. So that's my hope. I hope that you become a better Bible reader as you do this. Thirdly, I want you to appreciate history. History is important because I think it shapes what we think of today, right? When you think of history, what's the famous phrase about history? That if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, bound to repeat it, right? There's this idea that history is a bit cyclical because oftentimes we don't learn from the past. And I think there's a reality to that. If we understand what other people went through and the cultural battles that they fought, and we're really going to deal with that in this class. We're going to deal with a lot of the fact that God's people, the Jews and the Christians, have always asked the question, what do we do with culture? What do we do with politics? And there's always the option of let's run from it, let's go as far as we can, to let's kind of blend into it, let's see if we can kind of go along to get along. And then there's always the let's co-opt it. Let's take it for ourselves, right? And if you don't see those trends today, then you just watch the news and you'll get there soon enough. So we hope that if we see this, if we understand that in history, we can kind of go, all right, but what was Jesus's expectation? What was Jesus's stance to culture and to politics? And how can we kind of best step into his example for that? And then finally become friends. Let's have a good time. Let's get to know each other. So when it comes to what I'm gonna do as we are here in these times, it's gonna be heavy lecture, right? I'm just gonna be spitting out some information. There will be times where I ask for a little bit of discussion, I ask for your thoughts, but for the most part, I just want to kind of give you this information. I will be asking questions, kind of seeing if you know some of these things already. I want to give a giant disclaimer. I am not an expert. You might know things more than I do in certain areas, so please feel free to do this. I'm speaking to Brittany Zimmerman as I try to pronounce certain Greek words. So please forgive me. But I might, if I ask a question, who is this? What was that? What do you think of this? For the sake of time, I might just start calling out names because I don't want to wait around for the awkward silence of who's going to answer it. If you start hearing me ask a question and you don't want me to, you better look away. Don't make eye contact with me. As soon as you make eye contact with me, I will call you out, right? And if you don't like that, once again, dart your eyes. And if you don't know, there's no shame in your game, right? But the whole idea is that I want you all to kind of help me in this class. Well, let's talk about the outline for this time. Today we're going to talk about Hellenism. If you don't understand what that means, that's fine. It's the theology surrounding Helen Hunt. If you love the show, Mad About You, you're going to love this class. Thank you for knowing who Helen Hunt is. Twister, right? So then we're going to talk about Palestine and Judaism, Rome, Greco-Roman culture. We're going to talk about the concept of the Messiah, the Son of Man. We're going to talk about Jesus' ministry And sadly, we only get 1 week of looking at that, but I hope we can tackle a lot. We're going to talk about crucifixion, resurrection, euangelion. What is euangelion? I'm looking, huh? Okay, the gospel. So it's the Greek word for the good news. We're going to talk about what does that mean, the good news? What does the gospel mean? What did it mean in their context, and maybe how should that shape our context? We're going to have a week of where we talk about Paul, his life, his ministry, yada, yada, yada. We're going to talk about the transmission of the New Testament. I'll give you a 10-week notice. For that day, I'm going to need 4 people to come in about 30 to 45 minutes early. We're going to do an exercise on that particular day. I'll give you more warning as that comes along, but that'll be, we're going to do an exercise there. And then finally, the early church. We're just going to kind of go touch that for a minute, and that will be kind of the context of the New Testament era when those are being written. We're not going to necessarily jump into the early church fathers per se. So what am I referencing when I'm speaking of everything? Where did I get all this stuff that I'm going to be talking about? First is a book called The Backgrounds of Early Christianity. This is by Everett Ferguson. This is the 3rd edition. The 2nd edition is about $10. The 3rd edition is about $35-ish. I had to get this for WIT, so that's why I found this book. I would say that this is the best reference that I have. This is interesting. But it's academic. It's little mini articles that kind of talk about what is the culture and society like, and then it's just kind of going through each thing. It's not a narrative. It's not interesting if you're not interested in this. But for me, I'm like, oh, this is great. So this is interesting stuff. I would highly recommend to have this. If you're like, how do I know more about the Bible, especially the historical context? This would be the book that I would recommend to you. The second is the New Testament in Its World by N.T. Wright and Bird. I don't know what his first name is. Larry. Yeah, there you go, Larry. So you know that guy. So this is a great book. This is more like fun to read. There's anecdotes. There's little, N.T. Wright, if you don't know who he is, he's an Anglican. He was a bishop back in the day, like 10 years ago. He's a New Testament scholar. Some people find him very controversial, and we won't go into why, but he's controversial. But he's a New Testament scholar, and if your name is N.T. Wright, you have to become a New Testament scholar. Your name is New Testament Wright, so it's kind of nominal determinism. But this is a really good book as well. I would encourage you to read that as well. He has a whole lot of stuff when it comes to New Testament stuff. We're going to talk, another book that I don't have right now is Evangelism in the Early Church. That's where we're going to talk a lot about euangelion and these other concepts. That's what they give good information for. We'll show you that later. And then finally is the Rest is History podcast. If you don't know who the Rest is History podcast, it's the best history podcast in the world. Literally, it's like the number one. But Tom Holland, Dominic Sambrook, they're 2 secular historians. Tom Holland made kind of a big splash in the Christian world because he wrote a book, Dominion. And basically that book is how did Christianity shape the Western world? And so his thesis would be that we cannot live in the Western world apart from the influences of Christianity. We are so entrenched. Justice and the rights, having the right to do something, that's a Christian idea. Human beings have human value. And so when we see Black Lives Matter, Pride, the Pride movement, he would kind of denote these as Christian denominations, because you can't stand on the call to justice and human value apart from Christianity. Does that make sense? He's not trying to be sacrilegious in his statement of it's a denomination, but he's saying that they find their roots in the Reformation. Very interesting concept. You should read his book. But the Rest is History podcast, he does all sorts of different topics. They'll do anything from they're British, so they do a lot of British history, but they do a lot of Greek history, Persian history. They have a whole one about Jesus as history, Jesus as myth. I'm going to reference that one a lot. That one's great. There's one, and then in that he talks a lot about crucifixion. On the crucifixion class, I'm going to get pretty graphic. So as a parent, be mindful of that. But I won't try to be rude about it. I'll just be very like, hey, this is the horror of the crucifixion. So I would encourage you, I will send out eventually a link to all of my notes and a link to all of my resources that you can, if you're interested, you can look at later. Make sure I'm keeping up with time. Sources. Where are those references getting that information? That's what I'm getting at with this thing. Scripture. We're going to get a lot of our information from what we're talking about in Scripture. Now, as I'm saying, we're not going to be able to get the full picture of what I'm hoping to say by Scripture alone. If you only had the Scriptures, you wouldn't really understand the Pharisees. You'd be like, oh, this is an interesting Jewish sect, but you wouldn't understand their origin. You wouldn't understand where they came about. What were they really hoping to do in their ministry? A guy named Josephus. Does anybody know who Josephus is? Randy, who's Josephus? Famous historian. He was a Jewish general in the war against Rome in like AD 67, I believe. So he was fighting against Rome in the Jewish revolt. He kind of reads the tea leaves and goes, we ain't winning this. He switches over to the Roman side, and he becomes kind of an ambassador for Jewish thought to the Roman Empire. So he writes two books, The Jewish Wars and The Antiquities. The Jewish Wars is basically, what did we just do? Why did we fight you guys? That's that history. And then The Antiquities is he goes from Genesis 1:1, the creation of the world, all the way to his moment in history, explaining the Jewish history. So he's walking through, all right, here's who the Jews were, all the way from Abraham to Moses, to the exile, to where we are now. And so he does a really great job of giving you a context of the early church, because he gives you quotes about Christ. And we'll talk about his quotes about Christ. Are they reliable? Are they not? Yada, yada, yada. We're going to hear from the early church fathers. We're going to hear Eusebius. He's a famous church father who wrote a history book. He kind of talks about Jesus' ministry, and then to the early church. We'll hear what he has to say in some of that. You have pagan historians, people like Pliny, people that we're going to be able to see what did the Romans think about Christianity? What did they have to say? What were they saying about all that? So there's that. We're going to jump into Scripture. So if you have a Bible, jump over to the book of Daniel. That was all a bit of preview of where we're headed, what we're doing. Today we're actually jumping into Hellenization. Hellenization, and we'll kind of talk about what that means, but we'll jump to the book of Daniel, chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8. I'll read this just for the sake of time. The book of Daniel, obviously filled with a lot of symbolism and prophecy, and it's something as you read it, it's like, what in the world is this guy talking about? How do we interpret Daniel? So I'm going to start just kind of in the middle of what Daniel's doing, but Daniel's talking about seeing some visions, and it starts at verse 5. He says, as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his two horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up four conspicuous horns towards the four winds of the heavens. Out of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. Some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground to trample them. It became great, and even as great as the prince of hosts, and a regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown, and a host will be given to it together with a regular burnt offering because of the transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one spoke, for how long will the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over to the sanctuary, the host of the trampled underfoot? He said to me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. There's this story of this powerful ram who lives in the east. Out of the west comes a goat with one conspicuous horn. He defeats the ram. He lives powerful. He becomes great. He dies suddenly, and 4 conspicuous horns come out of this. Does anybody know what this is a prophecy about? What is this a prophecy about? Alexander the Great, right? This is a play-by-play description of the Alexander the Great. And if you know history, if you know the history of the Hellenization and the Greek Empire, as you read the book of Daniel, I mean, it's so very specific about how the history of the West will develop. Now, critical scholars, people who don't believe in the inspiration of Scripture, will look at Daniel and say, this is not real. Because, once again, we'll talk about the specifics of it. The specifics are so intricate of Daniel's prophesying about these specific kings that would come down that the critical scholars would go, there's no way that this is true. How could this possibly be fact? We as believers in Scriptures, as believers in Jesus Christ, we say that's because God is sovereign, because He knows that He spoke the end from the beginning, right? And so we are going to see this. So how does this speak to Alexander the Great? Well, let's jump into that real briefly. Alexander the Great is born around 320, 318-ish. And so he is a prince of Macedon. First off, look at this hair. I mean, gentlemen. I mean, my heart is envious of it, absolutely. But anyway, Alexander is the son of Philip, a Macedonian king. Macedonia is a region in Greece. Now, this is a region that the other Greek cities, the Spartans, the Corinthians, the Athenians, look at and they go, they're not real Greeks. They're just kind of But the Macedonians were allowed to partake in the Olympic Games, so that kind of gives us a clue that these guys were within the Greek sphere for sure. They spoke Greek. What is the Greek dialect that they speak? What is the Greek dialect that they speak? Yeah. Attic, yes, but I guess they speak Attica, but they're Attica, but then they speak, what do they spread out? What language? Koine Greek. Right? So these guys are very much Greek. So much Greek that he is tutored by Aristotle. Philip destroys Aristotle's city in his conquering of Greece. Philip was the first Greek king to be able to kind of conquer all of the Greek cities, the Greek city-states. And so this was a revolution in this world. So Philip says, hey, I will rebuild your city if you come and tutor my son. And Aristotle, being wise, one, because he's a philosopher, two, because he's probably a pragmatist, goes, yeah, I should do this. But Philip dies under suspicious circumstances. Who killed him? There's a few theories out there. One of them is that Alexander himself was a part of that. He comes to power. He takes power. He goes on this absolute cavalcade. We'll talk about that in here in a second. And then he dies untimely in his death. But before we do that, let's talk about what we need to talk about. What is the Bible? What's happening in the Bible timeline? In the middle of the Old Testament, the Jews are put into exile. The first exile is in 605. Who were they deported by? Who took them away? I'm not going to look at Brittany Zimmerman because she's answering all the questions. They were taken away by Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. So Assyria had previously deported the northern kingdom, Israel, or kingdoms, taken Israel away to Assyria. They're the 10 tribes that we don't know what they're doing right now still. And then the Babylonians come and they exile, or they take into exile some of the Israelites. And they do this 3 times. And final exile is in 586. They sack Jerusalem, they burn down the temple, and God's people are in absolute disarray. Because what is in the temple? God's Spirit, right? So where is God? What's going on? Ezekiel speaks to this, and I don't want to get into the details of that, but obviously we know that God can take care of himself. Well, in the middle of that situation, the Persians come along and they become the big dog on the block. And so that's when the Nehemiah and Ezra are kind of sent back by the Persian king to Jerusalem to build back up Jerusalem, build back up the temples and the walls. Zach spoke about that about a year ago in his sermon. So the Persians come back, and the Persians are powerful. I mean, these guys they go from all the way from like India all the way through to modern day Turkey, Asia Minor. And if you know the movie 300, that's the story of Thermopylae, where they come down. It's one of the greatest stories in the world. The Persian army comes down, and the Spartans and the Athenians and everybody comes, and they fight against and they hold back the Persians in that scenario. Well, the Persians then, they still come along and they burn down Athens. And that really gripes Alexander. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But the Persians are the big dogs on campus. And so they are in charge all the way from Egypt. They have influence over Egypt up to Palestine, Asia Minor, all the way through over to modern day Iraq, Iran, India. Persians are in charge. They are in the east. This is the ram. This is the ram that Daniel is speaking of, that there will be a strong ram that will be in power. And what comes out of the west? Alexander. Alexander comes along. He takes power. And his big goal after he comes to power is that he wants to set free the Greek cities that are in Asia Minor. So modern day Turkey, it kind of spits out, right? It kind of sits out as a peninsula. His big goal was that I just want to set free the Greek cities, the Greek colonies in Asia Minor. These are very rich cities. You're thinking about Ephesus. You're thinking the kind of the Galatian area. And once again, there's so many great things to talk about. So his thing is like, I just want to set the Greek people free, right? So he takes his band of brothers. There's like a core group of generals that he went to school with. He went to military school with, and he's really tight-knit with. He goes over to Asia Minor, and he routs the Persians there. I mean, it's like he mops the floor with them. It's not even hard. He actually takes captive the Persian king's wife and mother. And so now he's really got the chips. He's like, all right, so now we have to bargain. So he starts going and looking and going, well, this was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So then he now goes down into Egypt, and he conquers Egypt in a flash. No problem. Now he is the Pharaoh. He is pronounced Pharaoh in Egypt. He's the king in Egypt. He is so chuffed with himself. He's so proud of himself. He creates a city, and that city is called Alexandria, right? One of the key cities in kind of ancient times. After his founding, Alexandria was one of the foundational cities all throughout the Roman Empire, all throughout the Mediterranean Empire. So kind of as you see in this is where Philip and my boy Alexandria are from. And so this is where you have, this is the Peloponnese. This is where the Spartans live. You obviously have the Athenians, but you have famous tribes or famous cities like Thebes. You have Corinth. You have Delphi. And so these are the real key cities. And these are kind of the backwood hillbillies up in Macedonia. So that's who we're talking about when we say that they do this. Alexander is now just on a roar. He goes and he says, I'm in Egypt. The Persian king says, hey, how about you guys, you just stay west, we'll take east. He's like, I've got all the chips. What do you mean? So he goes out, conquers the Persian Empire, and he just doesn't stop. He takes over Susa, which is like the capital city, and then he goes into Pakistan. Then he goes into India, and like this guy just will not stop. There's an estimation that him and his crew went on a 22,000-mile journey over a matter of 10 years. 22,000-mile journey. And not one battle was lost under Alexander's rule. I mean, this guy is, in the sense of world history, one of the most influential top men ever. I mean, and that's not even an exaggeration. Like, you have Christ, you have Alexander, and, you know, I'm trying to think of someone that maybe even be equal somewhat, maybe Augustus. Yeah, Genghis Khan would definitely be one of those. Caesar Augustus, we'll talk about that guy in a little while. But, you know, this guy we cannot downplay the influence that he had in world history. And Daniel was sitting here in chapter 8, and he prophesies it all. He says that there will be a ram with one conspicuous horn that will come out, or goat, excuse me, that will come out of the west and utterly overpower the ram. He'll have all this strength, and he'll die suddenly. Well, what happens after he dies suddenly? Well, let's stop there. I'm getting ahead of myself. As he's conquering, he comes to this little teeny strip of land that really nobody is interested in, because what is it significant for? Palestine, right? Palestine is this center road on what is known as the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent is this idea, I wish I had a map, I don't have a map. It's this idea that if you're going down to Egypt, right, and you're going by land, you have to go up. If you want to go to like Asia, if you want to go to Greece, you have to go up in this very specific way, because you can't go straight. If I'm in Egypt, I can't just go straight to Babylonia. I can't just go straight to the Persians, because there is a desert, like an impassable desert. So the concept is that through this little strip of land called Canaan, called Palestine, is this little road that you can travel. And God in His sovereignty decides that I will place my people here at the crossroads of all crossroads. And so in order to get to Egypt, which is the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, Alexander has to go through Palestine. And Palestine just rolls over. I mean, there's no way that the Jews at this point are going to be able to fight Alexander. So there's a famous story by our friend Josephus. Josephus says that the high priest at that point recognizes that we're not going to be able to fight, but God in a dream says, you go out and meet Alexander on the road on his way to Palestine, and that he will not destroy Jerusalem. He'll take care of you. And all of his other priest friends are like, no, don't do this, don't do this. He goes out there, he comes, and he meets Alexander on the road, and Alexander says, you are the man that I saw in a dream. God told me that I ought to give, or, you know, in a dream I was told that I ought to offer sacrifices to your God. And he bows down, and then there's this story that Alexander comes to the temple of Yahweh, and he offers sacrifices to the one true King of Kings. And isn't this an awesome story? This is great. Alexander worships Yahweh. We're pretty sure that none of that happened. Josephus tells this story because as he's writing his Antiquities, he's trying to go to the Roman emperor and saying, hey, the Jews are pretty cool. The Jews are pretty great. We know how to be on the right side of an empire. And our God, other great people that you admire, the Romans really loved Alexander, other people that you really like, they like their God too. So the reality is, so when your life is on the line, tell a good story, right? And he completely makes up the story. And we have from the Talmud, the rabbis who are kind of telling the story of the Jewish people as well. They tell a whole different story. And it was kind of just like Alexander just kind of blew past Palestine, picked it up in his pocket and was like, all right, let's get out of here. He had another one of his generals met the high priest, and they kind of did the thing that they needed to do. Cool, let's go. Let's go down to Egypt. So less exciting, but also very interesting if you want to believe it, you can. But I wouldn't. So this is a famous Renaissance picture of Alexander right here before in the temple. This is the high priest worshiping. Of course, you got the clarinet player. Famous in the temple, in the Jewish temple, was the clarinet player. Not at all. So Alexander, his friends, his allies, his generals are constantly looking at him going, can we please go home? It's been 10 years. I haven't seen my wife. I don't know what my daughter looks like. Like, please let me go home. And over again, they're asking, and under some people believe it's, kind of conspicuous or suspicious terms. He dies. Some people believe that he just got something like malaria and he just kind of gave out after. But he dies at like 36 years old. He's dead, kaput. And so he goes, he's no longer, and he doesn't have a son who's ready to take over for him. So the big question is, who will take over this incredibly large empire that we haven't really set it up correctly with the right administration, the right bureaucracy. How are we going to manage this thing? Well, that's when a really convoluted, fascinating, interesting, confusing situation happens. This is when the Diadoche, how would you say that, Brittany?
Are you saying the bottom word?
Yeah, right here.
Diadochi.
Diadochi. Here's what you do. When you're online and you're watching YouTube videos about, Greek history, you get so many people pronouncing these names in so many different ways, the cities and the people, and you're watching it, and at one point, a guy is talking about these women. There's a lot of women with a particular name, and they keep saying Cleopatra. And when I finally understood that they were talking about Cleopatra, I was like, whoa, what in the world? And you'll find that there's like 100 Cleopatras in Greek history. So try to keep them all together. So the Diadochi is the word of the successors. These are the successors of Alexander. You have the four main dynasties that kind of end up after. One of the people that is not a part of this is a guy named Antigones. He had a really big part of it. There's a lot of war going on. Once again, it's more convoluted than the Game of Thrones. I've never seen the Game of Thrones. I just know it's convoluted. But when you hear all this stuff, but you have big the big names are Ptolemy, Cassander, Seleucus, and Lysimachus. Does anybody what is the name Ptolemy? Does that sound familiar? Cleopatra's husband, right? Cleopatra's husband. Who knows? So the Ptolemies are a part of they take over. Ptolemy, the original Ptolemy, friends with Alexander. As soon as he dies, Alexander dies, he runs down to Egypt and says, I'll take the breadbasket. It's the richest, wealthiest, most fertile part. I'll take this for myself. And the Ptolemies continue to hold Egypt for the next 300 years. And so when you're looking at the dynasty of the Ptolemies, it's Ptolemy 1, Ptolemy 2, Ptolemy 3, Ptolemy 4, Ptolemy 5. And then on their wives are Cleopatra 1, Cleopatra 2, Cleopatra 3, Cleopatra 4, and it's like, and they're having babies with their brothers and their sisters. It's really strange. Cassander, Seleucus is another guy that we want to keep our eye on. He fights this other guy named Antigones, and he takes over Syria all the way up to kind of a bit of Asia Minor, all the way over to the Persians, all the way over to modern-day Iran. And Cassander and Lysimachus, they're up. They kind of go back up to Greece and to kind of where they are originally from. But what we're going to see is there's going to be this battle between the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid Empire. Seleucid Empire, once again, pronunciations. So we're going to look at, in Palestine, starting around 320, the Ptolemies have control over Palestine. And this now becomes this little strip. This is what I meant by the Fertile Crescent. You'll have to go through Saudi Arabia in order to get to other regions. But if you wanted to go from Egypt to the west, you have to go through Palestine. Or if you want to go from Europe, which is up here, all the way down, you have to do that if you're not taking a boat. So Palestine now becomes like this middle ground. It becomes this battleground between these two giant dynasties who are constantly going back and forth and back and forth. And Israel is now feeling this pull and stretch and pull and stretch. Who do our alliances belong to? Who's going to be in charge next year? Why do we have to continue to have these battles in our backyards? So, for the most part, they're under the Ptolemies. But then in the year 200, we find that the Seleucids take over Palestine for good. And we're going to meet a really fascinating guy. But ultimately, we're going to begin to understand that as we step into the New Testament, you're finding a group of people, the Israelites, who are trying to figure out, what do we do with ourselves? And they've been dealing with this for the past 300 years. There are Gentiles in our land. They don't belong here, and they want us to assimilate to their way of life. They want us to just forget everything that we're about, and they want us to jump into that. Well, there's nobody that does this worse than a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. This guy has no nose. This guy has no nose. Is there a connection? I think so. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. Voldemort, I'm trying to be sort of funny here, but obviously this is a bust of Antiochus Epiphanes with his nose busted off. And this is Lord, I'd rather not say his name. So, but Voldemort becomes this picture in Harry Potter as someone who decides that he's going to strip himself of his humanity, that he's going to become more and more serpent-like, because what does he do? He splits up his soul into these 7 Horcruxes, and so he becomes less and less of a man. He becomes less and less the image of God, as I would like to say, but I don't know if that's what, there's a bit of that's what Rowling is trying to do, but very much, we in our most sinful of natures strip ourselves continually of the image of God, and we become serpentine. And if you come to this man, Antiochus Epiphanes, you're going to see a bit of a mirror image. Obviously, he's not trying to kill a little British boy, but he is a psychotic man. Epiphanes. Epiphanies. What does that mean? Katie Boggs, what did you say? What did you gave the... Chelsea Boggs, yeah.
The light bulb moment.
Light bulb moment, right, yeah. Something's happening. Bing! All right, something's coming up, something's appearing. Something is appearing. So the word Epiphanies means God manifest. God is manifest. He gave himself this name. Antiochus believes that he is basically a picture of Zeus on earth, that he is in fact God on earth. He gives them this moniker. And so you have to be a pretty wild man or a pretty bold man if you believe that your name ought to be Epiphanes. I am God walking on this earth. And so, without going into too many details, Epiphanes his dad was the one who won the battle against the Ptolemies to take over Palestine, so now he's in charge. There's this new kingdom over here in a region, in a boot, that is kind of starting to have its influence. And now he's Rome, and he's starting to have war against them. And so he tries to go down, he tries to capture the Ptolemaic Empire once and for all. He's rebuffed by the help of the Romans, because the Romans are like, well, we need Egypt because it gives us all of our bread. So he gets pushed back. And then I got to find this very particular scripture in Daniel 11. We'll get to Daniel 11 here in a minute. But he gets rebuffed because he can't have this. And so what he decides to do is he wants to go to Palestine, and he wants to make them feel his wrath. He's going to be very heavy-handed. He's a Hellenizer. He wants to bring Greek. Hellenization is basically the making things Greek, bringing about Greek culture. And so he is saying, I need to eradicate the Jewish people. I'm sick of them being around. They just need to become Jews. So he decides that he is going to refuse people to celebrate the Sabbath. They're not allowed to celebrate the Sabbath. They can't do any festivals, any of their new moon festivals. They can't celebrate any of the Jewish holidays. And eventually it gets to the point where he refuses them giving circumcision. Right? One of the most important identifications of a Jewish person. And all this time, what he's doing is he's building gymnasiums, he's building schools of philosophy within the land of Palestine, so that more and more people become Greek. In the gymnasium, this is where men would go and they'd work out, and it's kind of a boys' club. It's a country club where you'd go, and the thing that you would do is you would go to the locker room, take off your clothes, and you didn't put clothes back on. You worked out, you ran, you did your sprints, you did your, you wrestled, you rubbed down in oil and you wrestled. That's what they did, naked, right? And the Greeks were like, this is it. The human body, the male physique, this is like a beautiful, we need to, and the Jews are seeing this and going, this is horrendous. Like this is shameful. What are you doing? And one of the things that was most obvious about what made a Jew and what made a Greek was circumcision. You knew immediately. What party are you on, right? And so he was refusing them to do this. And this is one of the key parts of the covenant. In the middle of this, he does this horrendous thing where he takes 20,000 soldiers on a Sabbath day. He goes into Jerusalem. He slaughters a bunch of people. And then he begins to offer sacrifices to Zeus. He offers pigs in the Jewish temple. And this is the worst possible thing that a Jew could ever possibly hear, right? Like, you're killing pigs in the temple to another god? Like, I mean, rip your shirt, put on your sackcloth, and get your ash, right? Like, this is horrendous. We cannot let this happen at all. So, we're going to jump into, back to Daniel. All right. Make sure I read the right part. So Daniel's talking about the kings of the north and the king of the south. The king of the north is the Seleucids. The king of the south are the Ptolemaics. And it says that the king of the king on the north will prevail, and he's going to be an absolute jerk. So we're going to start at verse 10. All right, it says, his sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflowing and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and they shall rise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand, meaning the king of the north. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, become very prideful. He shall be exalted. I lost my spot because I made commentary. And he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the kings of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. Then after some years he shall come with a great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill their vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, and even his best troops, but there shall be no strength to stand. But when he comes against him, he shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. But he shall stand in the glorious land with the destruction in his hand, and he shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms into an agreement to perform them. He shall give him the daughter of a woman to destroy the kingdom. All right, so then you come down to verse 20. Let's jump down to verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who shall, so he's prophesying the Antiochus, his father, Antiochus Epiphanes, his also name was Antiochus. So that was all about Antiochus the first. There's a war of the north and the south, and the war of the north, that king wins. So, verse 20. Then shall rise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall rise a contemptible person. Who are we talking about? To the royal majesty, to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, and even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning he shall come into the rich parts of the province. He shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. And he shall devise plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great mighty army, but he shall not stand against it, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Let me get to, okay. Even those who eat with his food, okay, verse 27. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. To the end there's to be a time appointed, and he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. That's the story of, he goes down to Alexandria, he gets rebuffed, he's mad, and he goes back to his own land, and he's going to have some fury. And at the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south
but it shall not be to the same time before, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him. That's talking about Rome. And he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces shall with him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up an abomination that makes desolate. The whole thing is prophesied, right? The whole thing is prophesied. Daniel is in Babylonia. He's in the Babylonian Empire 300, 400 years before, and he still gets it right. And he speaks exactly to this. This is what is happening, right? So this is when history and the Bible come together. And we as Christians should look at this and go, man, God is so powerful and so sovereign. Finally, it's an abomination of desolation. This is what happens. This is what the Bible talks about when there's false worship brought into the temple and the sacrifices stop. So abomination of desolation. He's a nail to be hammered. A nail to be hammered. We'll talk more about that next week. We're going to talk about what did the Jewish people do to fight against this guy. Before we do that, let's talk about, and as we close up, Hellenism. Hellenism gets its name from the word Hellas. Hellas is the Greek word for Greece. They didn't say we were Greek. They would say we're Hellas. That's where we're from. Hellas, right? That's where they're from. So when we're saying Hellenization, we're saying the Greekization of the world. Alexander was big about this. He wanted to take Koine Greek everywhere he went. He wanted to make sure that his Greek gods were taken anywhere. And anytime they met a god or they saw an idol that was kind of like the main chief, lightning, strong, power, or, idol, god, false god, they'd be like, that's obviously Zeus. So let's just worship him as Zeus, right? And they did that in Egypt. They did that in Persia. So Hellenism, what did Hellenism bring? And how can we maybe think about what that means for us as Bible readers? Population. So the Greeks didn't stay in Greece. And they didn't even stay in Greece in Alexander's time, right? Even before that, they were sending out colonies. The Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, was filled with Greeks 400 years before the Bible even started. And so there's all these forces. But even now, as Hellenization is going, the Greeks are just going. Now they know, hey, I can go to Susa, I can go to Palestine, I can go to Egypt, and I'll have my friends there. I'll be able to worship Zeus, I'll talk to Aphrodite, I'll spend some money, I'll have a good time. Education. Education, literacy is on the rise. The Greeks they had public schools for everybody. They wanted philosophy to be spread around everywhere they went. The Greek language, quickly became the lingua franca, the language of the land, and historians began to write. Not only Greek historians, but every other empire began to write their history in Koine Greek. Philosophy. You got the Socratic people, you got the Sophists, you got the Stoics. All these ideas are being spread out. And especially as we read Paul, someone like N.T. Wright is going to say he is going to be heavily influenced, or he's going to have in his mind at least, these Greek ideas, these Socratic, sophist ideas. He's not trying to promote them, but he's able to use them to his advantage to be able to spread the gospel around. Economic. Alexander enacted one currency. Silver coins became the money that you can go anywhere. So now that makes it even more an incentive to travel. So if I'm selling spices, if I'm selling slaves, or if I'm selling, whatever I got, I know that I could do the same thing in Alexander and in Macedonia and in Susa and anywhere I go. In Babylon, I can begin to go and travel and begin. So now ideas and money and people are now moving around. So now we have a commonality of culture. We have a commonality. It's very pluralistic, but we all can say the same things. That'd be pretty helpful if you have a message that you want to spread to the world. It'd be nice if everybody knew these common ideas and we can pass these things along. Religious, the Greek cultus spreads, obviously, more worship of Zeus. Obviously, he's going to become Jupiter. Or is it the other way around? But you're going to be all these Greek gods are going to be spread around. So they're going to syncretize with local deities. Once again, they're going to take the gods of that nation and they're going to go, that's just Zeus. That's just Hermes. That's just say it. Just come on. Say what these are your gods are our gods. Everybody's good. Well, they're going to come against a Jewish people who are going to go, no, Yahweh isn't Zeus. Yahweh isn't the one of your many gods. He is the one true God. All right, city life. More cities are, life is now centered around the city rather than the countryside and individualism. There's a rise in the value of personal expression. Personal religion is a Greek notion, not a Jewish notion. What should we do as we take away this idea? Hopefully you even see that the book of Daniel becomes a little bit more interesting. You can kind of, what's happening? I'm able to interpret this. Whereas first, if you're reading it, you're going, I don't know what you're saying, right? But with a bit of understanding of the Greek world, you're like, like he's just ahead of time. He's literally writing out the battle plan, right? Like God is sovereign. So we should understand that God is sovereign in guiding history to bring about his ultimate plan of redemption. That's seen in Daniel, the fact that God knows the end from the beginning, right? He's sovereign. He knows these things. But much more so, we see that the stage is being set for a world religion to be born, where there's a common language. The Romans are going to bring the ability to have roads that you could travel around. So ideas are, it's easy for a Greek in Alexandria to accept the message because there's a language and there's some philosophical words that we can kind of debate about. And God is going to use that to plant his church and make sure that it has staying power. The people of God have always wrestled with how to approach cultural influences. Next week, we're going to talk about Judaism and how did those the Jews struggle with the influence of culture. There'll be many approaches to the climate in Palestine. How do we compare these with what Christ is going to bring? Next week, we're going to talk about the Zealots. We're going to talk about Pharisees, Sadducees. We're going to talk about the Essenes. We're going to talk about these political groups and how they envision the kingdom of God being brought to the earth. And there we're going to see how Christ comes and he does a very, very different thing. Hopefully, as you walk away from here, you go, all right, there is something that we can gain when we meld the two worlds of history and Bible together.